Ladies and gentlemen, a couple weeks ago, I made a video about 10 super nostalgic things that I remember most about the 90s and early 2000s. Not only was I happy to see the positive feedback from you guys on it, but I was actually excited to see that a number of you wanted a part 2, so that's what we're gonna do today. As you guys will notice, a lot of this stuff has to do with electronics, but that kind of would make sense considering that's probably what has evolved the most during my lifetime anyway. However, with that being said, there still is a couple, personal sentimental memories in here as well. Couple of plugs before we start. Don't forget to use code Wyatt's World on G Fuel or Prize Picks, where you can save yourself a discount on any G Fuel products or match up to $100 of your first deposit. But that's all I got for plugs. Let's get into 10 more super nostalgic things from the 90s and early 2000s. Alright, so starting off today's list of things that make me nostalgic about the 90s and 2000s is back in the day, if you were about to have a snow day or any sort of school cancellation, the only way to find out was by staring at your TV screen at the local weather channel. There was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was no website to go to look it up and see a list. You had to watch the local weather channel. And I know this is one of the most common impression farming things you'll see on Twitter for people who need to pay rent, but it literally did kind of feel like you were watching the NFL draft. I mean, just seeing these schools pop up, cancel, cancel, cancel. And it went alphabetical, so as it got closer to your school, you'd sit there and sit there and sit there, and one of two things would happen. Either school would be canceled and my mom would be pissed, or our school wouldn't pop up and she would laugh and put us on the bus and I would be furious. Either way, towards the end, when I was in high school and iPhones and stuff were out, we could just go to the website every morning and check. But that didn't become a thing until, I don't know, I was probably 13 or 14, the first 12 years of my life. We had to do it the hard way. Next up, we have got memory cards. Anybody remember this shit? It sucked. Like, back in the day when you wanted to save progress on a game, you had to have a literal memory card. Hard drives weren't a thing. It wasn't built in. I mean, maybe rarely it was on Nintendo 64 cartridges, actually. But any sort of disc for PlayStation or GameCube or whatever, you didn't have a memory card, you weren't saving your progress. If you wanted to bring your progress from your house to your friend's house, you had to bring that memory card. And if you forgot it at your friend's house, it was the worst thing in the world. Potentially the longest night of your life if you didn't see him at school, the longest week. The hilarious thing about the memory cards too is that they were not cheap. I remember bugging my dad and mom to, finally go out and get me one. And when they did, it was like $20 or $30. And I'm not kidding, they were like 200 megabyte memory cards. Yeah, man, you did not get a lot of space on these memory cards. And I remember having to go in and make sacrifices. If they were full, well, one game had to go and there was no getting it back. So you delete it. And sometimes if the game was bigger, it would require more than one block, they call them, and then you'd have to delete multiple. I used to have like 3 or 4 memory cards full. Actually, I probably still do somewhere, but honestly, the evolution of hard drives was one of the better things in existence. Alright, moving on, we have the CD, and just everything in general, too. CD players, CD binders, the CD. Long ago and far away, we didn't have phones to listen to music on. Spotify, Apple Music, that didn't exist. Bluetooth wasn't real, you couldn't plug anything into anything to hear music. iPods and MP3s, they weren't even around. Matter of fact, in this time period, if you wanted to listen to an artist that wasn't playing on the radio, you had to go out and get their CD. Usually, I don't know, $10 to $20. And then in order to listen to said CD, you'd either have to go into the car or listen to the CD player in there, put it in a radio, or put it in your portable CD player. Which sucked, by the way. If you were walking or running, the fucking song would just skip over and over again. But that's how life was, and it was like that for a considerable amount of time. I remember on the long road trips with my dad. He'd have me reach under the seat and bust out that big book of CDs, and we'd start flipping through for what to listen to. And sometimes you'd listen to one song, eject the disc, find another one. Eventually, you were able to burn your own CDs with your own songs on it, but still you had to have a CD. Because in the early 90s and 2000s, if it wasn't a cassette or a CD or the radio, you didn't have an option. Next up, we have a TV show. Does anybody remember Tales from the Crypt? This show used to scare the fuck out of me, and my dad used to actually have it on and just watch it. Now I love it. I actually own the entire series on DVD, which is outdated at this point too, but as a kid, this was mortifying. Pretty sure there were times where I would be annoying my dad and he would just flip it on so I would run out of the room and then he'd be like, okay. All it was like a horror cheesy TV show about different little horror tales, but it was narrated by this creepy guy guy called the Crypt Keeper. In today's episode, talked in some creepy voice, did a creepy laugh. I hated him. I mean, I used to think Courage the Cowardly Dog was scary, and that's nostalgic in itself, but then this show came into my life, and Courage all of a sudden turned into Barney. If you are an old horror fan, though, and you want to go back and watch some good shit and you haven't seen this before, I recommend the entire series. It's pretty cheap at Walmart. Next up, we have biking to the gas station. And the reason I have the Stranger Things picture up here is because other than, you know, the fucking Demogorgon coming after you and the entire world flipping upside down, the way they did things in that show was pretty accurate to how I remember doing things in the early 2000s. You'd get the gang of your friends, you'd all get on your bike, you'd pool your money together at a gas station, and we would always buy Jolt and Jerky Chew, and then you'd bike home. Obviously, I don't do this anymore because I'm almost 30 years old and I can drive a car now, but I don't think this really happens as much in the world anymore because the world is just so batshit crazy. I don't ever see groups of kids biking places, ever, when I'm going. And when I was younger, we would pass like other gangs of kids, like it was its own traffic system. The world was chill, and being able to bike around, that was your source of freedom as a kid. That was like having a car. Never forget that. Now moving on, we are gonna be in like the mid 2000s to about 2013, 2014-ish here, but we have the OG Xbox 360 headset. You guys do not understand how many of these I went through and how many years they got me through. So when Xbox 360 and PS3 came out, that's when gaming really took off for revolutionizing. I mean, that's when online gaming, really competitive gaming, DLCs, everything really, you know, just took off. The internet really became incorporated. Anyway, that was the very start of it, meaning gaming headsets at the time, you know, like the stuff we have now, they weren't really a thing. And if they were a thing, they were really expensive and really inconvenient to use. You had to hook them up to your TV and sit with a huge cord connecting you. Like, it sucked. It just wasn't a popular thing. So what you did was listen to the audio through your TV and talk to your friends through these shitty gaming headsets. Eventually they tweaked the models and stuff, but it was always the same thing. A piece of plastic with a piece of plastic connected by a piece of plastic, and after a week the thing was crackling every time you would talk. Like, kids are really spoiled today with what they have. The fact that their parents can just get them a headset to plug directly into their controller or to their console Bluetooth so they don't have to hear their kids' audio, and the fact that they're affordable now and you don't have to spend, you know, $100+. Back in my day, the asylum I came from, you wanted to hear your game better, you had to sit closer to the TV or turn it up. Next up, we've got overhead projectors in school. This one's crazy to think about. Nowadays, I mean, kids don't even have active boards. Kids literally have iPads or computers, and everything's just all right there. When I was in school, we didn't have any of that. Towards the end, we had the active boards, you know, where the teachers had like the touch pens and you could go up there and by the click of a button erase it and everything. But I would say for probably kindergarten all the way to 9th or so grade, we used overhead projectors. And these were big machines that teachers would roll out. They would turn on a light and it would project what it was seeing on the wall. I also remember teachers having a gigantic roll of like see-through film over it so they could write on it and then roll it so it would give them new sheets, and then all of a sudden the ink would all roll up and then they would have a kid come up and spray it all down and it would take like 15 minutes. I also remember sitting right by this thing and it would blast heat at you like a motherfucker. Very common occurrence, man. Like, this was a daily thing. It's how teachers taught. All right, up next we have MapQuest. Does anybody remember that? So this shouldn't shock you guys, but there was a time where, obviously I've mentioned a million times, we didn't have smartphones. We couldn't just whip up a GPS out of nowhere. Matter of fact, if you were going somewhere that you didn't know how to get to, you had to go on to mapquest.com and either copy down the directions by hand or print it out. And then you'd read that as you drove, and if you're thinking, oh, what if you went past an exit or something? Yeah, you were fucked. There was no Siri saying, turn around in 1 mile. There was a road closed and the MapQuest didn't pick it up and you didn't figure it out until you got there? Fuck you, man. Figure it out yourself. Eventually, later on, you know, before iPhones came out, there was the invention of the GPS, and you could buy them at Best Buy for a couple $100, but that didn't even come around until like the mid to late 2000s, and they were the crappiest, shittiest pieces of technology you ever seen. I'm honestly relieved that I just got to watch my parents struggle through MapQuest, because if I would have ever had to drive before I had an iPhone or something to tell me where to go, I would be just as lost as I would be now. I am so reliant on this phone. I still don't know how to read a fucking sign. Well, I do, but it's definitely not second nature. All right, next thing we got is the nostalgic pain of having to game on a handheld console before backlit gaming was a thing. So yeah, when I was a kid, obviously we didn't have a Switch, we didn't have a 3DS, a DS, none of that. Eventually we got the Game Boy SP, which became revolutionary, but before that was even a thing, I played on my Game Boy Color or my Game Boy Advanced, and they ran on batteries, they didn't recharge, and they didn't have a backlight. Meaning if I wasn't under direct light or in a sunny room, I couldn't see. I remember playing at restaurants like up on the table so I could just see under the light. Like it was a pain in the ass. My parents used to get yelled at by waitresses for it until they went out and got me a light attachment. Let me tell you something. Game changing. It was just a shitty light that attached to the end of the Game Boy, but the fact of the matter was I could game in the dark. I remember I would take a bag of batteries out of my kitchen and just go in my room and pull an all-nighter. I felt invincible. Nowadays, everything's backlit and can plug into a wall. You have unlimited battery life. Where I come from, you had limited supplies and you were running on limited time, but you made the most of every second, baby. And the last nostalgic thing for this video is the fact that holidays were so much better in the early 2000s and late 90s. I see TikToks, I see tweets, I see a bunch of people on Reddit even complaining about how holidays aren't the same now, and some people are like, bro, it's just you're not a kid anymore. No, that's a bunch of fucking bullshit. They're not the same. I remember when I was a kid, any store you walked into was decorated head to toe for Christmas or for Halloween. Shopping malls, head to toe. Schools, head to toe. City streetlights, just, I mean, everything was littered with pumpkins or Christmas trees or something. Like, holidays had legitimate aura. They felt like they were long because they would last a month because people would go all out. Nowadays, people will throw a decoration up or they won't do anything at all, and it's either because they're too damn lazy or they don't want to offend a culture that's not celebrating said holiday. Like, I feel so bad for the day that I have kids and I bring them out into public and they don't get to actually experience the same thing I got to when I was a kid. October and December used to be a month-long just movie, and now they're just ordinary months with one day of fun in each of them. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for 10 more things I remember about the late 90s and early 2000s. If you guys like this video as much as you liked the last one, feel free to show support. You guys know I appreciate any and all help. However, with everything I said, I'm going to get this edited so you guys can watch it on time. I hope you have a great Tuesday, and as always, I will see you in the next upload.